What's up, Ego Hackers? This is C.S. Joseph, and this is the final episode of Season 23, How to Parent INFPs. So, INFPs. INFPs can be very easy to parent. They can also be very difficult to parent. It's always extremes. Sometimes it has to do with cognitive focus, but sometimes it doesn't. The thing is, though, is that it depends what types of parents they actually have, and the kind of whether or not they're compatible, whether or not they have camaraderie, etc. There's so many different ways to interpret that, and it's definitely something different, something very different. And based on that, given that INFPs are extremely rare, parents oftentimes just don't know how to handle them, and then it's like, wow, my child can be extremely lazy, or they are very entitled, or they can be a burden. There's lots of negative things that they have, but then looking at the positive things, they see their child is always willing to be helpful, always trying to go out of their way for the sake of others whenever possible, which is also true. Definitely very accurate. It's because they have this unlimited source of sympathy, and sympathy is something that they develop first as a child. It's like the first thing there. So you have a 4-year-old INFP walking on the street, and they'd be like, wow, there's that homeless person there. We need to give them some money, or we need to give them some food. They're always the first to urge an adult to help their fellow man. And I always find that absolutely fantastic. And it comes from, extroverted feeling nemesis, where they're worried about harming other people as a result of not taking action. They're worried about not being caring enough. And they like to enlist the help of other people to have this shared affiliative experience where they're going out of the way to be, charitable or helpful to other people in some capacity. And this is kind of like how FI works. They have sympathy for someone who they see has suffering, and they want to go out of their way to help that person, right? And ultimately it's to give a better future to that person. And the thing is, though, is that because the INFP is so outcome focused and extremely outcome focused, well, that can be a big deal. And it can be an extremely big deal because sometimes they're not willing to help unless there is some guarantee of permanence for their help, basically. They don't want their help to just be this thing that, is just a one-time deal or doesn't last forever. They want their help to last forever, right? And that's, expert intuition parent going out of its way to make sure that people are able to do that. So it's kind of like, why bother helping if I know that it's kind of like, you're giving like a hobo money, right? Would an INFP really give a hobo money? Probably not, especially after they get burned one time, right? When they're actually just going to give them food. Because, it's like the whole give a man a fish or teach a man to fish. The ENFJ shadow within the INFP, especially when they are not a child anymore, well, then that means that there is an air of permanence to the help that they're trying to provide this person in need. And the problem is that oftentimes the ENFJ shadow is so underdeveloped, in adulthood, that it's not really in a place to be able to help. It's not in a place to provide that level of assistance, right? And I get it. I mean, it is what it is, but, when you have a child, they're not even going to have that. They may not have the specific skills, so what they're going to do is they're going to enlist other people who have the skill. Or they're going to imagine, and when I say imagine, I mean literally imagine, that they actually have the skill and then fail and that could cause them to get burned and may even lose motivation in helping to begin with, which could lead them down the path to self-aggrandizement, self-absorption, selfishness in general, and it could become really unhealthy for INFPs. Not only that, there's even academic concerns as well, because they will go out of their way to make other people around them even more ignorant, which is another negative aspect of that behavior. Something that most people just don't really pay much attention to. But that's the thing, like INFP children, no offense, INFPs, when you're watching this, no offense, but like, who really pays attention to you? I mean, on one hand, you're going out of your way to not be noticed, which is fine, and I get it. But on the other hand, you also kind of would like to be noticed. You would like to have, some status, some credibility, some credit. You like people to hear your opinions, right? Well, the thing is that it's also very hard as a parent of an INFP to get a specific INFP to actually be motivated to do that. It's extremely hard, like very hard. So most parents, they take the easy route. Remember, do what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Well, the expedient way with an INFP, there's a bunch of expedient ways to parent an INFP. And for example, just throwing your INFP child at academics. Seriously, just throwing them at academics. Especially INFP girls. The reason why is that typically INFP women don't take care of themselves. Statistically, the majority of them don't. Now, I'm sure there's people out there who heavily disagree with me. And that's okay. I'm okay with being disagreed with here. But the majority of INFP women don't really know how to take care of themselves. And for example, there's this TI parent on YouTube. His name is Kevin Samuels. I recommend him. He's he educates women basically on his live stream, and men by proxy, but only by proxy. And when he's doing this form of education, he often tells women, hey, it's like, if you're not aesthetically pleasing, then you better go back to school. And I'm like, wow, what a statement. What a very painful statement. And of course, most INFPs would be like, well, that was rude. Or, you can't say that. Or, oh, you're hurting my feelings. Because they reject that because they don't want to feel bad about themselves. Well, what Kevin Samuels was basically pointing out is that women who are aesthetically pleasing are the ones that men, more often than not, choose to be wives, choose to be the mothers of their children. Those are the women that men would typically choose, right? But INFP women, they have extroverted sensing trickster, they have SI child, which can cause them to be very lazy. And as a result of that, they're also, it just doesn't, their aesthetics just doesn't even occur to them, or they like to imagine that they know everything there is to know about aesthetics when they don't. They really actually don't. And it tricks them, and they constantly are failing in this way. Constantly failing. And that can be a problem. So what do? Well, you have to train them. The thing is, though, is that in today's day and age, a lot of parents either lack the time or the ability to make the INFP child feel wanted enough for the child to be willing to pay attention to the advice their parents are giving them. That's sad. That's really sad. And I would like to think that INFPs often are the subject of neglect from their parents. Now, I could make that argument about other NPs, certainly, but if you want to talk about making a type really, really bitter as a result of neglect, an INFP is probably going to be the worst one. I would estimate that. I'd estimate that for sure. Because their SI child is going to get bitter over time, And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. It's not going to improve until such time they have the opportunity to break that pattern that they have. And they want to break that pattern. Well, how do you break that pattern? Well, there's only a few ways to break that pattern. It comes from being desirable, but the problem is that how do they make themselves desirable? Well, they have to be willing to endure. But because they have their FI hero, they're not in the mood to feel pain. They're not in the mood necessarily to put in the effort for their own improving. So their own mood can self-sabotage them at the same time. So not only are they lacking the skill and the talent, for example, because of expert sensing trickster, for say, for example, an INFP daughter to understand her aesthetic. I mean, they're super feminine. Don't get me wrong. INFP women are extremely feminine, and it's one of the most attractive traits about them. I have dated a few INFPs in my time. The last INFP I dated, her name was Maricela. Beautiful. And she started out like everything kicked off because I went to a psychology and philosophy discussion group, and I was already there. She showed up late because, you know, what INFP doesn't show up on time. They are either early or they are late. There's no such thing as on time with them. And she comes over and she made a point to sit next to me, and she shared her bacon with me. She ordered bacon. I love me some bacon. Well, this woman shared her bacon with me. And that act of sharing, that introverted sensing child act of sharing, oh, it was so cute. I just died of cute. And it's just like, wow, I have no choice but to like want this person right now. You know what I'm saying? And that's an example of that, right? And this woman, she was very well kept. She actually worked out. She understands, you know, what foods she should be eating and not eating. She ate clean, which is actually pretty rare for an INFP. She was very well educated. Well, I had the opportunity to actually, you know, have a conversation with this woman through, because I was traveling at the time, didn't really have an opportunity to spend much time with her. We only went on a few dates, but we would write to each other all the time. And I'd write to her and I'd ask her questions like, hey, tell me, like, were your parents around when you were young? How involved were they in your life? You know what I'm saying? Well, they were pretty involved, actually. She'd talk about how her dad would force her to do things all the time that she wouldn't ever want to do, and then all of a sudden later come to figure out that is something she wanted to do. And she's like, wow, you know, like, for example, what she did for work is that she was a cosmetologist. And you're like, wait a minute, an INFP cosmetologist? Yes. Her father told her, I will pay for cosmetology school for you to go learn cosmetology. Not because I want you to be a cosmetologist, but because I need you to learn how to do your hair. That's what she told me. And I was like, wow, now that's a daddy. You know what I'm saying? That's a daddy. He's like, you need to learn how to do your hair. You need to make sure that you're putting in the effort to make sure that you are beautiful. You know, all dads, they really want their daughters to be beautiful. And, you know, it's really important because that means they're going to get attention from men. And, like, a man is going to definitely, you know, introduce himself to her, etc. Make her feel wanted. And because she feels wanted, then she's going to feel comfortable, etc., right? And he's always going to increase her, always going to increase her status as a result, right? Which is important. That's a very important thing to do, right? Well, most people don't even understand these little intricacies, these little dynamics when it comes to their children. And INFPs are no exception, you know. But like I said, you know, parents typically, because, you know, we live in a society where it takes 2 incomes now to raise a household. 2, right? Kevin Samuels talks about this all the time, and it's so interesting because the majority of the female callers that he gets, I've typed a lot of his female callers, and I don't want to say majority like as in over 50%. I want to say as in like of the 16 types that call in asking for his relationship advice or life advice, basically, those people happen to be INFPs. Like out of all the 16 types, INFP women are the ones calling in the most out of all of the 16. It could be just because of his type, because he's TI parent, because TE inferiors are very drawn to TI parent often because it's like, oh, I never had that TI parent in my life, so I got like psychological daddy issues, you know what I'm saying? There's no difference, right? It's those psychological daddy issues. Well, they go there, they go on a show, TI parent, and then he TI parents them, and he's like, listen, you know, I see that you're extremely overweight, you didn't take care of yourself, you know, and they're asking him if they should go back to school or not, because they're just not happy, and they're not in a relationship, and they're 28 years old, and never really had a serious relationship, don't have children, all their siblings have children by now, and they're just starting to get in that area of their life where they're starting to feel like leftovers, basically. And that's a serious problem. This happens more often than you think within, you know, the United States or Western society. This is very common. So, just like their parents who aren't really around to make their INFP feel wanted, especially their INFP little girl, those parents just default into, hey, just go to school. You know, Kevin Samuels will tell these women the same, just go back to school. I mean, it's not like you're going to be a mother anytime soon, so why don't you just go get a career and be a career woman? And this is how INFPs often fall into this trap. It's a huge trap. It's a huge problem. And they just don't know. They don't know what they're doing, and it's because their parents have failed them, and that's because society has ultimately failed the parents. Like I said, one of the biggest problems with society is the fact that it literally takes 2 incomes to raise a household. And as a result of that, I maintain that INFP women are severely victimized within that. Severely victimized. And it's kind of, it's unfair. It's wrong. How do they deal with it, right? So, it's really, really important to understand these effects or these consequences, these NE-isms, I guess, if you want to look at it from a raw extrovert intuition standpoint, because INFPs are constantly being bombarded by societal social norms, worried about whether or not they should adopt a social norm or abandon a social norm, and also afraid of what other people will think of them when they finally make a commitment to whichever social norm that they should be committing to. As a result of that, they go out of their way to be as unnoticeable as possible, to never stand out, because of these emotional barriers that they put on themselves. But these emotional barriers are also natural to their type, completely natural to their behavior, natural to who they are as a person. And, you know, sadly, most people are not even aware of this concept. It's just a huge lack of awareness, because, let's be honest, when you go out in public, how aware is anyone aware of an INFP? Tell me, who is it, right? Here's something for you. So who rejects more, men or women? Do women reject men more often than men reject women? What's the answer? The answer to the question is men reject women more often than women reject men. Because a man can look at a woman and then just immediately decide whether or not he wants her or if he's going to share with her, right? So if he's an SI user, Him basically wanting a woman is him sharing something with her. A shared experience, right? Having that shared connection, between an SI user man, SE user woman, right? But if the woman is an SI user, like an INFP woman, well, then there's going to have to be actual desire for her, from the other men. Now, granted, you want your daughter to be beautiful. Granted, this is very important, right? And don't worry, we're going to get to the INFP sons. Don't worry. This lecture might be a little bit longer than usual. But the INFP little girl at that point, it's like, okay, what do I got to do? Well, you really have to ride their ass, basically, as parents. You got to make sure constantly that they're being responsible. Because the amount of entitlement, the amount of laziness, the amount of I'm not going to change is a serious problem. For example, INFPs, out of all the types, in my opinion, other than maybe the ESTJ, are the most resistant to change. I think probably INFP is the most resistant to change. Absolutely. And the reason why is because you cannot just criticize an INFP. They're immediately going to just decide arbitrarily to not listen to you. And that's why they like taking TI inferior criticism or TI child criticism, and they cannot often handle the TI parent criticism. Now, if it's an INFP woman, she can, because TI parent comes off very masculine, and even though she'll get mad and upset, she'll dig it. She'll dig it. However, you have an INFP son, that's not really going to happen, and he's going to remain resistant to change. And being resistant to change is still going to be a consistent problem, an absolute consistent problem. So, why? Well, TI demon. TI demon is not going to listen to anybody. The listening function is TI, right? And how much does TI demon listen? Doesn't listen to anybody. So what needs to happen is that an INFP, in order to change, they need to be able to have multiple people who are technically kind of unrelated basically criticize them or tell them the same thing over and over and over all of the sudden. By telling them this, all of a sudden they'll grow up. All of a sudden they'll change. All of a sudden they'll realize, okay, yeah, maybe there is something wrong with me. You know what I'm saying? So, based on that, it's really important. It's really important to make sure that you do that. Now, this is where interventions come from, because it's usually at those interventions that INFPs, all of a sudden they start listening. But even then, if they see a united front against them, they'll just be like, well, you're all biased. And then that's their excuse to just not listen and not grow up or change, There's an INFP woman who was a coaching client of mine. She did not take care of herself. She went from being a very ectomorphic, surfboard-shaped woman to a woman who was 260 pounds. It was horrible. And she never, ever cleaned anything. Ever. Garbage was all over her apartment. You could not walk through it. And then it got worse. There was actually feces all over her apartment. This is a worst case scenario. This is an example of what you don't want for your daughter. Oh, but wait. I have also had an INFP man who has had this same behavior. And it's usually because the adults enable them in their life. And that's what I'm trying to say. Parents, stop enabling your INFP children. I get that they're highly sensitive people according to society. I get that. I understand. But the reality of the situation is there's no such thing as a highly sensitive person. There is a such thing as we're all human and we all have to take responsibility. And people especially INFPs who use the HSP, label as this crutch or this excuse to get through life and allow themselves to become depraved, self-absorbed, selfish individuals who don't actually contribute to anything at all, can be a serious issue. They become this huge burden to your family. I mean, as parents, do you really want a daughter or a son, we'll get to the sons in a second, who is just going to be this huge burden? Or do you really want them? Do you really want your children to be a burden when they're 40, right? And you're elderly at this point. You're getting into your 60s, right? And your child is 40, but they haven't gone anywhere. They just graduated high school, and then all of a sudden they just stopped growing. Wow. I guess, kudos to you for good parenting, right? As much as you would like to blame your child. And sure, your child definitely has some responsibility there. I get it. But at the same time, you as parents also have responsibility. And are you willing to take that responsibility? Are you willing to do it? Are you going to do it? Right? That's something I'm not really sure about. Because like I said, I consistently see how INFPs are the biggest victims of society, in my opinion, of all of the 16 types. They're so easily overlooked, and no one is willing to deal out the punishment that they need in order to get better. I had an INFP, now let's go into the boys. I had an INFP friend of mine, and he told me about how great he is at tools and working and doing construction. And you know what? He is. He's amazing at construction. And I'm like, how did you, with SE Trickster, become so good at construction and woodworking? He makes the most fine, ornate wood cabinetry I have ever seen in my life. I literally cannot believe how good his handiwork is. It's unbelievable. It's breathtaking. Even the finish that he chooses to put on the wood, the finish itself. Also, he chooses the finish based on the smell it gives, because he has to smell the finish, and he's like, does that really smell like fine, crafted, wood craftsmanship cabinetry? Does that really smell good? Does it convey a presence, right? And I'm like, holy smokes. Maybe I need to get my art skills up. You know what I'm saying? Well, he told me that he learned it from his ESTP father. His ESTP father, he told me, was really cruel to him as a child. Very cruel. But he's so thankful that his father is cruel because his father forced him to learn how to use power tools. Forced him to learn how to measure and how to cut and how to choose wood. And, how to use a table saw, how to use a hacksaw, when to use these things. Every single little detail. And his SI child memorized all of it. All of it. And then all of a sudden you have this INFP who has SE Trickster, and you're like, holy smokes. How did that happen, right? How did that happen? Well, like I said, his father rode his ass the whole time. These are just some examples of some of the problems that could happen. Not only that, when an INFP is being very burdensome, when they're being underdeveloped or underparented, I would say, they cause other people to become burdens. They are burdens to other people, but then they recreate additional burdensome people. They also, in order to spare their own ego of any pain, what they will do is that they will cause other people to be ignorant around them. Because they will over-filter everything that they hear and not allow other people to listen to anything unless their personal value system agrees with what everyone around them is listening with. Which is really, really lame. It's extremely lame. Of course, all philosopher types do this in some capacity. But it can be especially bad with an INFP if they're actually, if they're actually stating, well, what I mean is that they could be so behind the scenes they just may say nothing. I mean, that's the opposite, of course. And they can be in that position where they say nothing, because that too is a way for an INFP to keep people ignorant, because they just don't say anything, right? And I was a victim of that right here in this town. I was driving an INFP, and he's like thinking to himself, oh, maybe we should be going this other way. And I completely went the wrong way, showed up late, and it was horrible. And I was a huge failure for my life, and it's one of the reasons why I moved to California, away from here, because I'm like, wow, that is like one of the biggest failures I've ever had to deal with. My INFJ mentor was with us too, and he didn't even dress up for it. I told him, like, wear something professional. He didn't. He wore a flannel. I'm like, okay, dude. Okay, Mr. INFJ as the inferior. He's like, what? It looks good. Like, okay, maybe, Mr. SI Demon Comfort Zone. Like, stop. No, it doesn't. That's not professional, dude. But then again, I have to realize this man's never had a job. Never really had a job, and he didn't really understand at the level at which we were communicating, the level of which we were doing, right? So I guess it just comes down to the company that you keep, right? Well, that's another thing. Trying to make sure that your INFP doesn't develop those bad habits. INFP sons, they can be weak, right? They can be really weak, and that's what this ESTP father did to my INFP friend. He made him strong, and now he's an amazing carpenter, right? Just like I know another INFP woman whose father and mother totally got in her face. She would be fat shamed often as a child, and now she's actually got some modeling contracts as an INFP, because INFP models are extremely rare, extremely feminine, and extremely wanted, but she knows how to take care of herself. It's very, very important. I know that a lot of folks get all frustrated with me when I make lectures like this, and they're just like, wow, you very much overvalue the aesthetics of a woman. And I'm like, no, I don't. It's not about overvaluing aesthetics of a woman. It's just that y'all are conditioned to think that, what's on the inside is what counts. No, it's not, because aesthetics is important to beauty. You can't have beauty unless you have aesthetics plus humility. You have to have both, right? But a woman who's not willing to humble herself to increase her aesthetics and have the realization that she doesn't actually look very good, which is really hard for an INFP woman to see because she has SE Trickster. She has a hard time to even accept that she doesn't dress well, because she values comfort over external aesthetics. When she needs to be taught, especially by the women in her life, she needs to be taught how to do both. She needs to be taught how to have a balance between comfort and, visual aesthetics in some capacity. And she's already pretty feminine, being that she is an INFP, which means she'd be in demand like that. And she comes off like she has a super high amount of humility anyway because of FI Hero. So just right out of the way, she'd be very desirable to men in her life. And then all of a sudden she'll have the opportunity to become a mother as a result. Instead of just being this career-based wallflower for the rest of her life, which most INFP women in Western society are. Such that you have people like Kevin Samuels criticizing them for it, when he's just telling them, well, you literally have no hope, so just go back to school. Unless, of course, you're willing to actually work hard for once in your life and count your calories and eat organic non-GMO foods only and never have sugar again. Yeah, okay, that would be nice. And be vegan or keto, etc., depending on what would benefit them the most, but Either way, it's important to understand, it can be really difficult parenting INFPs, because oftentimes, parents just assume that they know what's best for their INFP. In some cases they're right, in most cases they're not. But parents also just overlook them. They're so easily neglected, these children, They're also like they're pretty good at academic achievement. So it's like, oh, it's just the parents get lazy because they're too busy trying to like keep bread on the table because two adult incomes is required to raise a household now, right? So because of that, two adult incomes, they're not really able to spend as much time with the INFP to train the INFP and everything it needs to know, to train the INFP boys to be strong, and to train the INFP girls to be beautiful, right? And I really mean strong, because SI child needs to be strong. Because otherwise they'll just be stuck in their comfort zone, and then they'll be content with living in their filth. You don't want that, right? So to prevent that, you need to spend time with them. And a lot of that time, you need to be willing as parents to be negative. You need to be willing to be negative towards your INFP child. And they're going to cry and complain and try to outlast you, but you have to force them. You have to take their choice away. You have to make them work. You have to make them swing a hammer. You have to make them use the screwdriver. You have to make them do their hair. You have to make them comb their hair every single day. Make them do it until it becomes habitual for them, because they're just not going to pick something up and know what to do. They have to be taught. Why else do you think the ENFJ archetype exists? It's the teaching archetype. It exists so they can teach INFPs, the people who need to be taught the most. They are a tabula rasa, a clean slate, when they are first born. They don't have any life experience. They don't know anything. An INFP girl, your daughter is not going to know how to comb her hair or brush her hair by default. She's not going to know that. An SE user woman would know, but not her. She needs to be shown how to do it. And then you have to watch her do it herself over and over and correct her for every single mistake that she does until she gets it right, and do it over and over and over, #exposure therapy, until it becomes a habit. And that's it, folks. You want to have your INFP child to be an amazing INFP child? That is the crux of INFP parenting INFPs. Building within your child healthy habits. The problem with healthy habits, and it's not about teaching them to, make the right choice or have healthy choices. No. Healthy choices is what you teach an NI user child. This is an SI child we're talking about. Very obstinate, right? An SI child, you need to help them develop healthy habits. Like that book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That book was made for INFPs. Seriously. Read that book. Read that book to your INFP child. It's a big deal. It's super necessary. And honestly, without it, most people are not even going to understand. They're not going to understand that why are they always falling so far behind? Well, it's because you haven't developed the healthy habits. They have to have this foundation of habits built before they even make it into adolescence. Before they even, they have to. They just have to. Otherwise, they're going to be miserable. They're not going to have the status, the fame, the reputation they want in their life. They're not going to have the health that they're going to need in their life, because they're not going to be able to take responsibility for meeting their own needs, because you, the parent, didn't spend enough time to build up healthy habits in your INFP son or daughter, and your son is weak and your daughter is ugly. Congratulations, you're a failed parent. And probably because you had a child and you got poor. Because, 2 adult incomes are required to raise a child now. Because the value of the dollar lost its buying power by 1,000% since its inception in the early 1900s, the greenback. So, if you want to not have that really horrible outcome with your INFP, it is time for you to take charge as the parent and parent them appropriately, and parent them via Jungian parenting. Let's talk about Jungian parenting. So Jungian parenting, and yes, I know that that was a big 40-minute introduction, but yeah, with INFP episodes, You guys know me. I typically go really, really long with them because it's so important to me that INFPs change for the better. I love INFPs. Everyone thinks I hate them. They frustrate the hell out of me all the time. But that's because society shits on them and parents don't know how to parent them because their parents either feel too guilty for putting so much pressure on the INFP. Let me tell you something. The INFP can take the hits more than anyone else. The INFP is literally that person that floats above the water and they're in like perfect zen and they aren't even moving a muscle and they're just there meditating, and you could throw a rock at them and the rock would hit them and then just bounce off of them and drop right into the water, and they're still sitting there continuing to float as if there wasn't even a problem to begin with. Okay? That's what an INFP is. So an INFP can absolutely take a very harsh ESTP TI parent telling them to get their ass in the garage and change the oil because, quote, if you have a penis in this family and you don't know how to change the oil, there's a serious problem. Get your ass in the shop. I literally watched that happen. It even happened to me personally by my uncle. But the point is, that is a standard. They can take it. That doesn't mean you're a bad parent, so stop feeling guilty. Get over your guilt, you FE user parents, if you have an INFP child, and make them work. Because that's the only way they're going to develop these healthy habits. So Jungian parenting. It is everybody's, absolutely everybody's responsibility to parent their fellow human beings. We all have parent functions. This is why. And every human being needs to gain the benefit. They need to gain the benefit of everyone's parent functions. The masculine and feminine parent functions from each of the 16 types multiplied by 2 of the 2 genders. And then obviously different age groups. Everyone needs to have the full benefit of all of that cognition. Because if they don't, that can be a problem. They really need that. And this is how, this is why people are so underdeveloped. This is why, boys don't their parent function doesn't even really show up until 27 years old, and that's when they figure out personal responsibility. When they should have that figured out by 16, right? Well, or 17. Harry Potter technically became a man at 17. That's when he could use magic, right? It's because 17 used to be the age of manhood. Not anymore. It's been pushed back 10 years because human beings aren't exposed to enough human beings. We live in our little nuclear families that are split apart because daddy's not home, or he's gone, or he's trying to earn money, or mama got rid of him because he's a bad dad, or whatever. Who knows? Who knows? That happened, right? So based on that, you gotta watch out. You don't want that. You don't want that for your children. So understand that everything is against your INFP child, and you have to be willing to pressure them. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Here's the thing. If this INFP child is not even your child, you still have to pressure them. Do you have any INFPs in the CSJ community get angry at me because I'm pressuring them all the time, because I'm constantly exposing them all the time, and then they just label me a hater or someone who hates them? I don't hate them. I actually love them. And I love them enough to inflict pain upon them so that they change, so that they can develop healthy habits, right? And those healthy habits, they're not going to happen overnight. That's just not how life works. That's not how it works. But that's what they need. And I'm giving them what they need. Sometimes daddy knows best. And sometimes in your Jungian parenting, you got to elect yourself the daddy. Everyone needs a daddy. Where's their daddy? Even if they have a daddy, their real daddy may not actually even know how to raise these INFP children. So you got to be is it me? Is it you? Etc. That's what it comes down to. You have to be willing to do that. It's super important, folks. It's mega, mega important. So Jungian parenting. There's 2 phases. There is their childhood, and then there's adolescence. And in childhood, you need to focus on the inferior function while you still have access to it, because when they turn into an adolescent, they won't have access. You as the parent will not have access to their inferior function, because the parent function will begin its development for the first time, and the ego will be complete, and the ego will defend itself and will not allow you to touch their inferior function anymore because that's where their insecurity is, right? All of a sudden they're afraid. Children, when they're really young, they're not really afraid of anything. They take a lot of risks. They're just not afraid, and it's because they haven't been conditioned yet to be afraid, and they haven't had their failures or their shortcomings pointed out by external people in their life, which creates that inferior insecurity within their inferior function. In the meantime, they just stay aspirational, and this is why children constantly present as their subconscious and not actually as their ego, and that's why it's somewhat more difficult. And saying more difficult, well, people are like, that's like not grammatically correct. I think it is in this context, damn it, because typing people's difficult all the time. It's just even more difficult to do so when they're a child, when they're, so it's because children often, very often, the vast majority of times, 7 out of 10 times, 4 out of 5 times, are literally like they're presenting as their subconscious. It's so hard to keep track. It's just so hard to keep track of them. And if you're not around them long enough or not paying enough attention to them because they're too busy trying to earn the almighty dollar because it requires 2 incomes to raise a household, 2 adult incomes, well, then that's an issue. By the way, teach your INFP children about the fact that, 2 adult incomes are required. That's something that they would, they'd actually want to be aware of that. I mean, I would. I definitely want to be aware of that. So, anywho. So, yeah, focus on building their inferior function during their childhood. As for their adolescence, you need to develop their parent function. But doing that is extremely difficult, and the reason why is because the ego is protecting itself. So you have to use cognitive orbit, also known as the back door into the ego. So you have to focus on developing their critic function so that through cognitive orbit, their parent function develops. It just develops at a slower rate than where you were helping them develop their inferior function previously. So, first things first, what do you do with an INFP daughter or son? You focus them on achievements. Achievements. Achievement is everything. Achievement is everything. So like, how you take your INFP son, literally one of the best things you could do for an INFP son is force him into Boy Scouts and force him to earn merit badges. And start in Cub Scouts. Merit badges, merit badges, merit badges. And every time he gets a new badge, reward him for that achievement. Achievement, achievement, achievement. You have to slam achievements down their throats. Start with any achievement. And then after a while, start focusing on quality achievements, because then eventually, an INFP, when they get into their adulthood, they'll have this lazy approach of, well, at least I achieved something. So reward every achievement at first, but then after a while, be like, okay, no, you could have done better. And raise the bar. Raise the standard constantly, the standard of achievement constantly with your INFP child. This is absolutely necessary for their own personal growth. And if you're not constantly raising the standard, okay, do it better, do it better, do it better, you're a bad parent. You're not really there. Do you know how many INFPs I know that have wished their parents would have raised the standard, that they have wished that their parents would have pressured them more, that they wish their parents would have expected them to achieve more? Almost every INFP I've ever spoken to about this subject has said that to me. And it's because they are the most easily enabled of all of the types, and people are so afraid to pressure them. But they are the people who need to be pressured the most. Another good thing for an INFP child, get them into martial arts. Physical activities, using tools, very important. Survival skills, very important. Yes, academics are okay, but guess what? INFPs grow the most through reading. If you can get your INFP child in their childhood to start reading nonfiction, you are literally parent of the year. Most INFPs, they live and die by fiction, but you really need to get them to read nonfiction, even like financial nonfiction. Anything that they're remotely interested in nonfiction-wise. Shove that nonfiction down their throats, because it will increase their TE inferior, and then their opinion will become valuable. And when they have a valuable opinion, they're not going to become a burden to other people. Not only that, they're willing to speak up more often because they know that they actually have something to contribute to the conversation, because their FE nemesis is not worried about not being able to contribute. And that's why they often don't say anything, because they don't even know how to contribute. But if they're constantly reading, they have a ton of subjects with which they can draw from to keep up any conversation, to the point where, because their SI child basically remembers absolutely everything, right? Now they eventually will develop a habit of achievement, and that's the goal. So focus on achievement, and then eventually they will have the habit of raising the bar themselves, raising their own standard. If you as the parent are raising their standard of achievement, and saying, okay, well, you could do better next time, 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 and constantly have that line and toe that line of, you could be doing better next time. That right there is the most valuable thing that you could give your INFP son or daughter. It's just, make sure you have masculine-related achievements for your son and feminine-related achievements for your daughter. Make sure your daughter is in dancing while your son is in martial arts. Let me tell you, folks, I'll be honest with you, a lot of people don't realize this, but extroverted sensing master, because of introverted sensing child, having all of the training in the world and all the self-discipline in the world when it comes to dancing, there is usually no better dancers than INFP women. They are absolutely astounding and extremely skilled. I sometimes can't believe it. There's even like an INFP member of the Jabberwockies at one point in time. Is that the name of the dance group? I don't know if I said that right. And it's because, and music, and yeah, sure, INFP is a little bit more sensitive, and yeah, they can definitely get into dance more often. Well, this is one way that it seriously benefits them, right? Get them into dance and have them compete and earn achievements, right? Get to black belt, that's an achievement, right? Keep your INFP achievement focused. They need achievements. And then keep raising the bar. When you do this, they'll end up raising the bar themselves. They'll have the healthy habit of achieving themselves. They'll even start reading nonfiction. Their opinion will be super valuable because they will remember all of the experiences of their learning in their childhood and everything that they've ever done, right? You got to fill that bucket. You got to fill that cup as a parent for INFP children. You got to fill it, because if you're not filling that cup, you are doing your child an insane disservice. Your INFP needs to have lived life by the time they graduate high school. They have to have absolutely, unequivocally lived life, unlike anyone else. Like helping build a house, or doing dance competitions, martial arts, Boy Scouts, Eagle Scouts, FFA, FBLA, tons of these extracurricular activities. And make the extracurricular activity far more important than their academic study. If you don't do this, well, they're going to get caught in that academic trap, because it's very easy. It's the easy road. It's the expedient thing. It's an expedient thing for an INFP, essentially, to just think that they can do that bullshit tradition of, oh, I'm going to go to school, go to college, get a job, and then they're miserable for the rest of their life because they're not actually contributing to anything of any value whatsoever. And then as a result of that, they're a burden. Because anyone can go to school, anyone can go to college, anyone can get a job. And of course, after going to college, because you likely didn't pay for it, because two adult incomes are required to raise a household, etc., like, get your expectations where they need to be, parents, like, seriously, and teach your children these expectations. It's super important. Super important. you know. So based on that, keep that focus up, right? Hammer those achievements. It will help them develop really good, healthy habits. Hammer that standard of achievement. They will keep raising the bar themselves. Hammer reading. No one benefits more from reading than an INFP. And in reading, the more an INFP reads, the more brilliant they become. They become truly brilliant minds, brilliant people. And that's incredible. It's really incredible to have that opportunity. Because the reality of the situation is, parents, INFPs are the absolute most brilliant of all the types. They are absolutely brilliant. But they won't get there unless you're willing to pressure them in this way. Unless you're willing to get them to develop healthy habits of achievement. And, start with small stuff first. Always clean your room. And it'd be like, tell them that the achievement is not, great, you clean your room today. No. The real achievement is to be able to do it every day and not stop. Self-discipline, right? That's what you have to teach them. You have to brush your hair every day. You have to brush your hair multiple times a day, right? You have to take care of it. You have to shower every day, basic things like that. I know it seems ridiculous, but I'm sorry, these people can become extremely comfortable in their own filth if you're not careful. You got to watch out for that. You don't want that for your children. They have to have these healthy habits built up before they get there in their life. They have to have these healthy habits. So, anyway, then they reach adolescence. They got some good achievements, really good at dancing, taking care of themselves. Your INFP daughter actually has the ability to understand outfits and what outfits mean, and matching colors and why, and doing her hair and why, what jewelry to wear in which situations, help her create a system around that and why, and how all these different things are very relevant, right? All these things are very relevant. Well, congratulations, they're now an adolescent. So now what do? You can't develop their expert thinking in theory anymore because their ego is now protecting it from you. And for the rest of their life, if they want to develop that, it's on them. So hopefully you as parents did your jobs. Hopefully. But boom, you got yourself an INFP adolescent little girl, adolescent boy. You have adolescence on your hands. What do? Well, very, very simple. Very simple as to what to do. So, they have this critic function, right? It's how you get them to develop their parent function. See, if they're not wanted, they're not going to be motivated to do anything. You can't ask. You can never ask an INFP, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? They're just going to say, I don't know, or I never thought of it. It's because it's not about what they want. You have to instead teach your child, teach your adolescent, that it's their job to make themselves desirable with their expert intuition parent. They need to become desirable. Well, how do you do that? You have to get them to understand consequences that choices other people make, but you also have to get them to be willing to make those choices. Like I said in the INTP episode, an iCritic is all about taking risks. It's all about taking risks. The thing is, though, with INFPs, it's social risks. They have to take social risks. Any kind of risk that could potentially reduce their status, their reputation. They need to take social risks. They shouldn't always be playing it safe socially, right? INFPs are extremely social creatures. They're very affiliative. They like being taught new things, and then eventually they themselves become professors of the things that they've been taught. That's how they live their life, right? Well, that's cool and all. That's awesome, but oftentimes, they're not willing to take those risks, right? But the thing is, it's easier. It's really easy for an INFP who's really well achieved and also has healthy habits of achievement, raising the standard, reading, so that they have this really, really valuable opinion, right? Having that amazingly valuable opinion, because having that valuable opinion means that they have the ability to be more social, right? So we're always talking, and I talked about the INTP episode about how you want to socialize them. Well, with the INFP, it's more of we're achieving, making them get lots of achievements, gathering achievements. Where achievements is the goal, it's the mission, it's the point. But the thing is, though, is that it's going to get to a point in time, especially in adolescence, where your INFP is like, well, now I don't know what I want to achieve in. So you have to get them to a point where they have this YOLO point of view with their ENFJ shadow, where it's like, well, if I've never done it before, I should do it. This is one of the things that an ESTP father taught his INFP son, and I really remember these words. It's actually a very, very interesting adage or saying that he had. A fantastic saying. And the saying goes like this: if you're afraid of it, you have to do it. If you're afraid of it, you have to do it. Because if you don't do it, otherwise you'll just be gripped by fear for the rest of your life. If you are afraid of it, you have to do it. That's the only way you're going to grow. This is how INFPs get to the point in their life where they are willing to take risks, right? And of course, it's easier for them to take risks because they have those achievements and that life experience that hopefully they have within their childhood. Hopefully they're not stuck in, some Brooklyn or Queens, New York apartment with very little going on and very little exposure to the outside world other than literally what they see on the television, which is, Sesame Street. I mean, I too want the state to educate my child and also to parent my child and raise my child because, I'm one of those adults who has only one adult income when I need two adult incomes in order to raise children, etc. Women, this is why I recommend going for men who are 35 plus, because men who are 35 plus will be able to provide you with that lifestyle, because by then men who are 35 plus make enough money that it is equivalent to two adult incomes at that point in time. And then you should be making babies with those people, not with younger men, because they only have one adult income, for example. But it's not just about money. It's more about, hey, we live in a shitty society. What do you want me to do about it? You know what I'm saying? So, anyway, just keep that in mind. Understand that that's like a risk with all of this. So, then they need to learn how to take risks. Take the risk. Take the risk. So, make sure that you give them choices. And sometimes, they won't be willing to make a choice. Because sometimes the INFP has this perspective of, well, nothing's going to happen if I don't take a choice. If I don't take any risks at all, I'm good, right? You got to tell them, you got to teach them that that's incorrect. You have to force them to make a choice, and then you have to force them to live with the consequences. You cannot bail them out. You have to prove to the INFP on their own that they are capable of making any decision and living with the consequences. And thereby living with the consequences, that they are strong enough to deal with any and every consequence that comes their way. They really can. They can get through anything. INFPs can outlast anything. It's so interesting. I mean, just in the same way an ISFJ can outlast, or an ISFJ aspirational can outlast everything, and probably more than anybody, the INFP can outlast probably like the third most highest enduring people on the planet. Just keep that in mind, folks. Like, it's really important to get them to make choices, because they're just not even going to know something. So as a parent, you're going to have to look at your INFP and be like, okay, pick something. I don't care what you're going to pick. Pick something. And yes, you're going to have to live with it, but still, pick something. That way, over time, they can start developing the healthy habit of actually making a decision. Otherwise, your INFP is going to stagnate, and then they too will become a burden to other people due to that stagnancy. And that's not something you want as a parent. Nobody wants that for their kid. No one wants a 40-year-old wallflower, burdensome child who is literally rot in your bones. That's actually biblical when I say that. You don't want that. And that really is because you didn't pressure them, or you didn't force them to make decisions. Yes, it's not a bad thing to force your INFP child to do stuff. Force, force, force. Force is important. It really is important. I don't know why parents are just so averse to forcing their kids to do things. Do that. And under threat of punishment if you have to. But then when they do force to do, and if they do it well, reward them. Or tell them that there's levels of reward that they can earn as a result. Levels of reward goes a long way with your INFP. Especially if they have the opportunity for other people to recognize, what they have done or what they have achieved. That they get credit, right? Because INFPs absolutely love getting credit. So anyway, that in general is the Jungian parenting approach to how to parent INFPs. And doing this, you will basically prevent them from having midlife crisis because you develop their TE inferior. They're not really afraid about their status because they already know that they've lived life. They've been through a lot more than most people, even in their childhood. And that they've achieved a lot more than other people have in general. And all of a sudden they're like, wow, I really have done so much, and I've done a lot more than most everyone. I don't really have to be afraid of what other people think of me. Maybe I don't even have to concern myself at all with what other people think of me, because I've done a lot more than they have. I've suffered a lot more than they have. I know I'm stronger than them. I know I'm more capable than they are. I'm more read than they are. I'm well read. I'm more read than they are. And it's like, wow, everyone is just so ignorant, and I'm not. Okay, I guess I don't have to be afraid of what people think. And then your INFP child is willing to share their collected wisdom. Because the purpose of the INFP in their life is to bring wisdom in the world, to curate wisdom, and to guide that wisdom for the future so that other people could have a better future. Just like that little girl at the very, very beginning of this lecture who has that sympathy for the homeless person. But the thing is that oftentimes INFPs don't even offer help because their help is not going to be permanent help. And they know it. But now they have this amazing, valuable opinion that they could just insert the right thoughts into someone's head and then give them a better future as a result. That's amazing. And because of that, they could be this big professorial-like person who is able to profess these good ideas and insert this amazing input, valuable input into other people, so that those other people literally get up from the ground and start walking and start taking care of themselves and actually start caring about themselves, and they actually have a future and a hope. An INFP could do that. Well, that's not going to happen if you're not properly parenting your child. And your child could be that. Pay attention. It's important. But then it goes further than that. Imagine your INFP willing to take risks, willing to live with the consequences. An INFP with a YOLO attitude, have you ever even seen that? Imagine your child doing that. And because of that, they will have a greater personal responsibility, because they will see, because the more decisions that they make and the more consequences they live with, they know exactly what to avoid, and it makes them a lot stronger, which makes them a lot more desirable, because they have a lot more life experience. And then all of a sudden, those ESTP girls or those ESTP guys or those ISTPs or those NFJs, men and women, will start chasing after your INFP son or daughter, and then all of a sudden, boom, you got grandchildren in a very healthy familial context. Thank God for your good parenting. You know what I'm saying, folks? They can have that. But, a lot of people are just completely unaware of that concept. Completely unaware. So, folks, understand that this is the potential that this is what it could be. And they won't have quarter life crisis because your son or daughter will be super desirable, and they are being responsible with their desirability, and they realize that the source of their desirability is life experience, and life experience only comes from making decisions and taking risks, right? And then all of a sudden, they don't have quarter life crisis either, and they are set for life, and they will be there for you at your 3/4 life crisis, and then eventually your final life crisis, which is your death. They will be there for you, and they will not let go of you, and they will be loyal to you to the end because they know you helped them develop that life experience that made them valuable, that made their opinion valuable, and you gave them the ability to have the healthy habits, to make decisions, to take risks, to always raise the bar, to increase the standard at all times for themselves and others, that high standard of achievement, and how important and how necessary it is. That's what you, as parents, were able to accomplish. And I hope that you do, because the world needs it. Because unless you do this, parents, the world has a very dark future ahead. But if you are able to pull this off, the world actually has a future and a hope. And that's what you can provide the world through proper parenting of your INFP child. If you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, or enlightening, please leave a comment below. That would be great. This concludes Season 23, How to Parent Each of the 16 Types, also known as Jungian Parenting. And so, anyway, folks, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys tonight.